we enter into the plagues that happen upon the nation of Egypt. And we're going to talk about some stuff that you get some chance to look at. Maybe if you want to do on your own time, you'll take your sheet home with you when you're done. Look up some of the things that we're going to talk about, because it's going to take a lot more research than what we can do here this morning. But you'll enjoy what was actually happening in some of the plagues, what was going on. This week, while we were at the men's advance, I kind of tried to say this last week when we were talking about when God talked to Moses, and Moses talked to God and asked him what your name was. And he says, "I am that I am." And I tried to explain it a little bit, but I don't think I got into it really deep enough. But one of the preachers at the men's advance that we were at this week actually commented on that. He said, we don't say it right or inflect it right, is the way he said it. He said it's I am that I am. And he was making the point that when God was saying I am that I am, he was saying when you would go through the nation of Egypt, you would see all these different gods, and you'd see all these different, the God to the bugs, the God to the frogs, the God to the birds, the God to the sun. And God is making the point, he's saying that I am all those things are, and I'm more than that. He said they'd have these little idols or these obelisks set up, and at the bottom of the obelisk it would say, I am the God of, I am the God of, and he was saying that he believed that the I am actually means I am that too. I am that I am. I am that I am. And so that's an interesting thought to think on, whether that's true or not, but I do believe that's part of the reason why he said it. And what you'll see this morning, when we look at the plagues, you're going to see that kind of playing out a little bit. One of the things that Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, will say to Moses at a later point is that the plagues were actually revealing that God was greater than the gods of the Egyptians. And so we don't necessarily see it perfectly laid out, but we'll get a chance to kind of talk about it a little bit here this morning. And if you want to do some outside research on this whenever we're done, this would probably be good for you to do so. All right. So I'm going to ask that you open up your Bibles to Exodus chapter number 4, and we're going to jump right into the text here and kind of look at some things in more detail. Exodus chapter number 4. Exodus chapter number 4. We're getting close to the plagues. We're going to be going all the way. We're going to be jumping in. We're going to be reading a lot this morning. Exodus 4, 29 to 31. It says, let me read it for us for this morning, and then I want to ask someone to read verses 1 through 5 of chapter 5, okay? So, Bill, will you do the chapter 5, 1 to 5 part? All right. It says, and Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel, and Aaron spake all the words which the Lord had spoken unto Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people, and the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked upon their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshiped. What were the signs? If you remember, I think that was Fred's little activity last week. What were the signs that God gave to the children of Israel, or to Moses to give to the children of Israel, to convince them that he was sent from God? One had to do with the rod turning to a serpent. Another one had to do with hand going into your breast and it turning to leprosy. And then there was a third one, which we never see actually practiced, at least not as a sign for the children of Israel, was taking a cup of water and pouring it out and turning it, and it turns to blood on the ground. Okay, so those are at least two of the signs, if not the third one, was done. And the children of Israel, when they recognized it, they did what? They believed, right? They believed. They did what Moses didn't think they would do. Right? They believed that he was sent. Okay, go ahead, Bill, read the next part. Okay, so after this little conversation that Moses and Aaron have with Pharaoh, Pharaoh is going to punish them basically to show that, try to basically say, I'm greater than your God. Don't you sit there and try to get me to bow down to your God in any way. And so one of the ways in which he makes them be punished is he adds to them harder labor, sets the labor load higher. And then at one point he takes away the brick, or takes away the straw that was being supplied to make the brick, and says they have to go gather their own straw while the labor quota has been raised. So now it makes their burdens even more greater. And as a result, the children of Israel start to begin to really kind of get mad at Moses, which is what the intention is. That's what reason why why Pharaoh is doing this is really to punish them and turn them against Moses and Aaron, and squelch this little bit of what it looks like appearance of rebellion against them. Now, we get into chapter number 6, and we see the second encounter happening here. And so I'm we're going to do a little bit of, maybe see how many we got here, verses 28 to verse 13 of chapter 7. So let's split it into at least a couple people, maybe if not 3 people. Let's do verse 28 to verse 2. Who will do that? To 7:13. Yeah, so 6:28 to 7:13. So if you'll do 6:28 to 7:2. Okay, if I can get 3, let's do 3 to 8. Okay, 3 to 8, Fred. And then after that, let's do 9 to 13. Who wants to do that one? Bill, you want to do it again? 9 to 13 of chapter 7. All right, go ahead. That was a hungry snake. All right. So God tells Moses, go back the second time. First time didn't work out so well, right? Go back the second time. And what is Moses' first response? He ain't going to listen. I'm a man of uncircumcised lips. What does that mean when he says that? Anybody kind of got an idea what he's talking about? It's similar to saying the same thing that the Jews would say to a Gentile talking to a Jew. You know, they were not going to listen to me. I'm like a man of uncircumcised lips. See, Moses is talking from a Jewish perspective, right? Because that's the understanding of what the Jewish people, and when they talk about uncircumcised anything, that just refers to Gentiles. And he says, and I'm like that to Pharaoh. I'm like somebody that is not part of his group. At one point, I used to be part of that group, but I'm no longer like that. Does that make sense? That's what he's meaning. And he's not going to hear me. He won't hearken to me, he said. Okay? Now, I want to give you this thought to remind you, when they go in and he does speak, this is what the text tells us. How's the setup look? Is it Charlton Heston going in talking before Pharaoh? How does it look? Yeah, Moses is not talking to Pharaoh. Moses is talking to Aaron. Aaron is talking to Pharaoh. And Aaron is doing the miracles at this point. Did you notice that rod? It said it was Aaron's rod, not Moses' rod. Someone said, how did that work? How did that look? I don't know. Maybe someone suggested it's possible that Moses might have been speaking in Hebrew to Aaron, and Aaron was speaking in Egyptian to Pharaoh. And he said, but what God was doing in the process here was making Moses look like he's the God and Aaron the prophet. And the prophet performing, not only speaking, but performing the signs and wonders of that God who was calling. He said that's the way God was making him look. Okay, do you have a question? Yes. Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a minute. We're going to look at that in just a second. Okay, let's see. What did God reveal to Moses about the outcoming of the meeting, or the outcome of this meeting that he's going to have with Pharaoh? And it's kind of a foreshadow of how it's going to be continually. Verse number 4. Pharaoh won't listen to you. And what else? Actually, go to verse 3. Yeah, look at verse 3. That's a better answer to it. And I'm going to harden his heart. I'm going to harden his heart. Now, here's what God is telling Moses. What you're going to do, what you're about to do, isn't going to work the way you want it to work. What you would initially expect to have happen. What's our attitude oftentimes when it comes to anything we're doing for God? We want immediate results, don't we? And God is saying that's not how it's going to work. And I'm just letting you know, I'm running the show here, and it won't work the way you think it should work. I don't want to take a long time, but I want to tell you one of the stories we heard yesterday when we were at the men's advance. It was so good. The last sermon Clifton Miser preached, he started off by telling this story about how at one point he said he lived in Lebanon, Missouri at the time, a little small town in Missouri, and he was an assistant pastor to the pastor. And he said there was this young lady, maybe in late teens, maybe early 20s, that told a lie in the church that other people joined in with, and said that by the end of the whole thing, over 100 people left the church because of a lie that she told. And Clifton Miser said he was of such a nature at that point. He said he went to the pastor and he said, if you let me, I'll just go rip her face off right now. I mean, I'll go tell her what's what and confront her and make her look stupid and all that kind of stuff. And the pastor says, no, don't do that. Don't go down that path. Let God take care of this. And he said, I never really did deal with that in my heart. He said, it just finally, because of time, it went away. She left. She wasn't around anymore. Those people weren't around anymore. And he said, but I never really felt like the pastor was right in doing what he did. And he said, but then 30 years passed. He ended up leaving, having gone to Englewood, Colorado, pastoring there. He'd been pastoring for so many years. He ended up getting cancer, and he was going to have to get chemotherapy. And said that there was so many people at that time getting chemotherapy. He was waiting in a long line of people getting chemotherapy for cancer in that area. He said, so then this charge nurse came out and she said, I'm sorry that we don't normally do it this way, but can I be the one that administers your chemotherapy? And hopefully we won't have it so backed up next time and you can, get in quicker. And he said, that's fine. So said she took him back in the back room, where they were doing it, and started plugging him up to the chemotherapy. And he said, I knew that she was going to have to stay with me because you can't just walk off, and you had to stay with me in that process, and so that way nothing bad happens. And he said, so I said, well, I've got a captive audience. I need to take the opportunity to give her the gospel. And he said, so I started off by asking her where she's from, because he said most people in Colorado aren't from Colorado. They're from other parts of the country that have moved to Colorado. And she goes, well, I'm from a small town out in the Midwest. And he goes, oh, yeah? He says, well, I'm from the Midwest, too. She says, where are you from? She says, well, I'm from Missouri. And he goes, I am, too. What town are you from? She says, oh, a small town. You never even heard of it before. And he goes, I bet you I have. What town is it? And she goes, Lebanon. He said, really? He says, I'm from Lebanon. And he doesn't know who she is at this point still, and she doesn't know who he is either at this point. And he starts naming people that he knows that she knows. In fact, he knows her brother, having played football with him in high school. And at one point, the lady goes, who are you? He says, I'm Clifton Meiser. And she started to break down in tears. She was that young lady that had told that lie. And she said, she told her story. She said, after that happened, she says, I left, went to Kansas City, Missouri, got married, and I married a loser because she said the guy went to jail continually. She said, after the fourth time I left him, we had a child. Grows up and gets to about the age of 16, commits suicide. She said, I couldn't handle it anymore. I left, went away to Colorado thinking that I could escape all of this stuff. And she said, I met another husband, got married, and we've been going to church. She says, but my conscience has never let me go from the day I did what I did way back then. And she says, I'm so sorry for what I did to that church and what I did to you and the things I said and hurt so many people. And she says, I know I got to get right with God. But if it had happened the way Clifton Meiser would have had it happen, it would have ruined it. But it happened in God's timing, and God had a purpose for it that was much greater. How amazing. And just amazing. I mean, how in the world does that happen? Except there's a God who runs things that we don't always understand. And that's sort of, kind of just make the point, that's what God is saying to Moses. It's not going to work the way you want it to work, but when we all look back at it from this point, from our perspective now, people are going to go, wow, that was amazing what God did. And that's what God is intending it to be, is to show how amazing He is. And the way in which He's going to work that about is by hardening Pharaoh's heart, not softening. Not making him more agreeable, making him less agreeable, and more antagonistic to you and to the people of Israel. As we'll see here in just a moment. Yeah. So He has a purpose to bring glory to Himself, as we see in our world as well. Okay? All right. Okay, let's answer that question there that Bill just brought up. Why is He doing that? Why does God end up bringing all these judgments upon the people of Egypt? Go look at verse 4. Someone read that verse out loud. And then verse 5.
And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch forth my hand upon Egypt and bring out the children of Israel.
Why? Because God wants to glorify Himself for who He is. Did you notice there He says that they'll know that I am the Lord? That's that name. And He's not saying I am God. They'll know that I am who I said I was. I am. And so when that thing's over with, nobody's going to doubt that this God's greater than all the Egyptian gods. That this is the I am. This is the God who made everything. This is the God who's in control of the frogs. This is the God who's in control of the bugs. This is the God who's in control of the cattle, of the storms, of the sun, everything. Yes. Well, it may be now, but they weren't at that point. Islam didn't show up till about 700 years after Jesus. So, no, didn't stick very good. Well, Egypt has, since from that time, has changed hands by many times over with different people who've taken over it. Yeah. Yeah, we'll get that. We're going to get to that here in just a minute. Yep. So, question else that Bill brought up was the how did these magicians reduplicate what Moses did or what Aaron did with dropping the rod and it becomes a serpent? It says that they did it by their enchantments. The word enchantments there is a word that's only found here. It's only found here in the Bible, this place. And the word means flaming. That's another meaning of the word. It means flaming. And somebody suggested that it could be understood that they used smoke, puff of smoke. You know how magicians do. You ever see why they go on a stage? Magicians know how to make things happen. They call it smoke and mirrors. What are they doing? Why do they have all that stuff? To hide what they might be really doing. Is it possible that they're doing it that way? Yeah. Have a little spark over there, a little puff of smoke, and then all of a sudden somebody brings it. Possible. It's also possible that they're demonic. And the Bible says that that Satan uses what's called lying wonders. Lying meaning they are deceptive wonders. They're miracles that are happening to deceive. And because Satan has some bit of power. He doesn't have the kind of power God has, because there's going to come a point where these magicians won't be able to duplicate what's being done. Okay? And when they are doing it, what are they saying? They're basically saying, our gods are greater than your gods, even though Aaron's rod ate up their rods, right? Which that must have been a sight in and of itself. I don't know how that worked, but that would have been something to see that. So there's no real for sure of whether this is chicanery or this is legitimate supernatural power that's satanic in nature. One way or the other, that's what's going on. Does that make sense? So just because you see a sign or you see a miracle doesn't necessarily make it from God. Okay? That's why the best thing to do is to test it in light of what's this book say. Right? Even Peter said that about his experience with Jesus on the mountain. He said, we were at the holy mountain. We heard the voice of God say, this is my son, hear him. He says, we saw him transformed on that mountain to become dazzling bright. He said, but we have a more sure word of prophecy. And he says, and you do well that you take heed to it. Because even those kinds of things can be deceptive. Because Satan is able to do so. Does that make sense? So the only thing we know that is not deceptive and that we can measure everything to is this book. Okay? All right, it's your measuring rod, so don't throw your measuring tape away. Okay? So we're going to do a deal that you guys are asking here. It's an activity called the 10 Plagues of Egypt. Can I have TJ pass these around real quick? And we're going to use this the rest of the time here to kind of work through. Go ahead and give me your speed as you do it. Okay? We're going to use this chart here to work through all the plagues, and I'm going to give you stuff. I'm going to just ask you not to ask me how I know these things, because I'm just going to give them to you right off the chart here. What I will ask is if you do want to know some of these things, look them up, because they are found all over the place. If you want to look on the internet, look up some history of Egypt. I know that when I was going through Exodus at one point, several years back here, we went and did the same thing here, did every plague and talked about what each plague, how it dealt with the different gods of the Egyptians. And there are some little bits of maybe back and forth on being sure which one is which. So we're going to do our best to figure it out, okay? All right, now you got on your paper there the first plague. What is the first plague? You see it there marked? Water turned to blood. So open up your Bibles to the passage. It's 7:20 through 22. Who wants to read that real loud for us? Fred? Okay, go ahead. Okay, so this is the water turned to blood. How does Pharaoh respond to it? He hardens his heart to it. And the reason why he hardens his heart is because of what the magicians did, which is the magician's response. What's that one? They're able to, by their enchantments, by their deceptions, they're able to do this as well. However it is they did it. Okay? And the God that this is representing, or it is really attacking and saying that God is greater than this God, is the God Happy, which you have there in your notes. But let me tell you who he is. He's the God of the Nile River. And the Nile River was looked at as the source of life. Happy was the God of fertility. He had that kind of view that he was the one that brought life to the land, brought life to animals, brought life to the people, if you will. But now God is filling that river with death and demonstrating he has power over this. Okay? So that's the explanation there. Second plague is found there in chapter 8, verse 5 through 7, and you want to put this one on here. This is frogs, if you want to write that in there. But let's have someone read chapter 8, verse 5 through 7. Okay? I see Wayne there. Go ahead. There's a song I had by a guy named Mark Rogers, I think is what his name was, but he sang a song called One More Night with the Frogs. It's such a funny, because when Moses comes to Aaron, or when Moses comes to Pharaoh asking him, do you want me to take this away? Pharaoh says, tomorrow. Take it away. Read it. Go read it. It's there. And he sings the song, he wanted one more night with the frogs. He wasn't done with all the misery he was going through. All right, so Pharaoh's response, first off, initially, is that he agrees to set the slaves free, but then what does he do? Anybody got an idea? Changes his mind. Okay, what do the magicians do? They made some more frogs for whatever reason. Okay, and the Egyptian deity is the god Heket, which you do have in there, and this is the goddess also of fertility, which this goddess was pictured as one with the frog's head. And so you have this life goddess now really being mocked as being overabundant, don't want this. And so you have this pest now in the form of a god. Does that make sense? And so that's believed to be possibly what he's attacking here. Okay, next one, lice. Lice, this one's always fun to get. All right, this is verse 16 and 17 of chapter 8. Who wants to read that? Darla? Okay, gotcha. I'll get you next one, Bill. Go ahead, Darla. All right, so what do you think Pharaoh's response is going to be here? Hardens his heart. Now, it's at this point the magicians cannot do this. There's been allowance up to this point that they could do some of these things, duplicated in such a way that it's deceiving Pharaoh or adding to it, but they're not able to. And in fact, the response they give is, this is nothing but the finger of God. What is God putting on display here? He's putting on display His power that cannot be duplicated by anybody. And by the way, these magicians, even though they might be tricksters, they are said to represent these gods and have their power. And yet, they're not able to do this. What does that say about them and their God? Weak. Yes. Now, this one is believed to be the god Geb or Achor. It could be either or both. And they are gods of the earth. And the dust is then formed to lice. So that's an interesting possibility, either one of them, Geb or Achor or both. Okay? Gods of the earth. Next plague that we have here is the plague of flies. If lice wasn't enough, flies is the next. Go to 20 to 24, Bill. All right. Now this is where we get to, you cannot explain this. People tried to explain these kinds of things, and you know the parts they leave out are like how it got separated from one person. One group didn't get it and the others did. That doesn't happen normally. This is supernatural stuff happening that can't be explained any other way. Okay, did you have a question, Bill?
No, I just had a comment.
Go ahead.
I've been in this small flies thing before.
Have you?
Yeah, we was in South Dakota on a fishing trip.
I know what that's like. Yeah, it's nasty.
Nothing but flies. We couldn't fish, we couldn't eat, we finally had to go down and get the motel.
Could you imagine that being over the whole land of Egypt like that? Except in the land of Goshen, which is right in the dead center of it. Somehow it didn't hit there. They had fly control. They had an invisible force keeping the flies away. All right, Pharaoh, how does he deal with? This is similar to the frogs. Initially, he agrees to let them go, but then when the flies are taken away, what's he do? He hardens his heart. He changes his mind. Now, magician's response at this point, we're not told. I'm guessing they, for the most part, up to this point, have not been offering to do any more. Yeah, well, they're still around. We'll see them here in a minute. They're still around, but they're not attempting to try to reduplicate anything anymore. Who would want to reduplicate flies? Maybe they can't, yeah. All right, Egyptian deity here is the god Khepri. And this is the god of creation that had a fly's head on it when you see it. So now you got another pest in the form of a god that's happening here. Okay? Yes, sir. Nothing is mentioned, I've said, of them. Yeah. They are awkwardly silenced at this point. Yeah, big fly swatter. Yeah. Yeah. The next one, 9, 6 to 7, is the death of livestock. Okay, and who wants to read that? Chapter 9, verse 6 and 7. Easy one. Anybody? Okay, Fred, I saw your hand first. Died not one.
And Pharaoh sent, and behold, there was not one of the cattle of the Israelites dead. And the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go.
Okay, so at this point, we have the death of the livestock. This, we already probably got the answer of Pharaoh's response. What is it? Harden his heart. Magicians, do we have any response? No. This God is believed to be, and this one seems to be pretty prominent because even the Israelites reduplicated this later. The god Hathor, and it was in the form of a cow. Remember, they made those statues, and they did it more than once in their history. They did it right at Mount Sinai, and then they did it a little bit later. If you were there at the men's advance, he actually talked about it a little bit. About with Jeroboam, is it? It's Jeroboam. That's it. Jeroboam. Sorry, I get the name right there. Jeroboam, who made golden calves as well to get the children of Israel to bow down to those. But the god is the god Hathor, the mother cow goddess, and all the cattle are dead. So God is making a point here. Yes. Livestock. Or something of that nature. At least she appears to be that. She represents at least cattle, we'd say, of some sort. Okay, next one is boils. How many people have ever had a boil? They hurt. All right, I saw Wayne raise your hand. That's 9, 10 to 12. Go ahead, Wayne. All right. This point, what do you... Go ahead. So I'm sorry. Yep, you're right.
And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he hearkened not unto him, as the Lord had spoken.
All right, so the answer to Pharaoh's response, hardened heart. Magician's response, they got boils. Couldn't stand. Now, it kind of gives you the idea that they sort of served as the people trying to resist Moses and Aaron, and now they can't even stand up to them because they got the boils, and Moses and Aaron are just fine. Nothing's wrong with them. I think it talks about it breaking open. I think that's what it means. I forget what that is, but I think it has to do with it splitting open, boiling and then busting open. I think that's what the word is talking about. So I may be wrong on that, but if I remember when we went through it, I think that's what we figured out it to be. So this god is the god Isis, which is the goddess of medicine. And now there's no remedy for their health issues. Okay? This one is hail and fire, and I want to just tell you that the fire is not fireballs shooting down from the sky, though that could have been a possibility that God could have done. When you see in other parts of the Scripture, it refers to lightning. You'll see it in the book of Psalms that it actually refers to it as being lightning mingled with hail. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when it says hail and fire. But this is verse 23 to 26. Who wants to read that one? Bill?
And Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord said, send thunder and hail, and the fire ran along upon the ground, and the Lord rained the hail upon the land of Egypt. So there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt, since it became a nation. And the hail smote throughout all the land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast. And the hail smote every herb of the field,
Once again, a separation happening here. Okay, how do you think Pharaoh responds? I know we're not reading it here, all of this, but how do you think Pharaoh responds? Yeah, and he agrees to set the slaves free, then later changes his mind. And once again, his heart is hardened. And then look at verse 34. It says, and when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunders were ceased, he sinned yet more and hardened his heart. Look at this. He and his servants. And I'm wondering if the servants might be some of the magicians there that is mentioned there. So not only did the Pharaoh harden his heart, at least whoever these servants are harden their heart as well, and that could be the magician's response. Okay? The god is the god Nut, or Nut, N-U-T. I'm not sure how you pronounce the name. This is the goddess of the sky. And can you understand why this is important? God is showing, I have power over this, not Nut. Nut is a nut. Right? All right, next one is locust. And this has got a kind of a split of things happening here. So look at verse 12 and then verses 16 to 20. Who wants to do those? Okay, Fred. Yep.
The Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt, and eat every herb of the land, even all the hail hath left.
Okay, and then 16 to 20.
Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron in haste, and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore forgive, I pray thee, my sin only this once, and entreat the Lord your God, that he may take away from me this death only. And he went out to Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And the Lord turned a mighty strong west wind, which took away the locusts, and cast them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in the land far from the coast of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and so he would not let the children of Israel go.
Okay. All right, so initially, what does Pharaoh respond to? What does he say? Yeah, he has almost a worshipful heart, right? Please forgive me. I'm so sorry. I sinned against your God. I sinned against you. But then when it all goes away, he changed his mind and his heart was once again hardened. Now, the magicians, by the way, how did they respond? Anybody got an idea how they responded? Let me see if I can find it. There's a part where they actually come to Pharaoh and tell him, please let them go. Where is it at? Let's look at it. The Lord said, stretch out your hand. Moses stretched out his hand. Pharaoh called for Moses, said, go serve, only let not your flocks, little ones. I'm reading the wrong one. Maybe I'm on the wrong one there. Anyways, there does come a point where they do finally turn on Pharaoh and say, how much more of this can we take? It's destroying our country. Their God is doing all of this. Let them go. No, anyways. The God is the god Seth, or Set maybe. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. This is the god of vegetation. And the locust consumed all the vegetation in Egypt that was left after the hail. Yeah, the remainder. You know, you have a hailstorm that hits your farm. You've had that a few times where it destroys a lot of stuff. And then all of a sudden you have a locust plague that comes in after and finishes it off. There you go. Boy, that would be harsh. Be horrible. And think about it. It didn't just happen in one location in Egypt. It happened over the entire land of Egypt. Huh? Eating all the stuff, yeah. Is it in verse 7? Where does it say it at? Yeah. That's it. Verse 7. Yep. That's it. That Egypt is destroyed. By the way, you know what they were so fearful of at the beginning? Is that their enemies would come against them. Right? If their enemies came against them with all the Israelites in their land, this is going to destroy us. And now, if they had just let them go, they wouldn't have had any of that happen. And now, they are very vulnerable to being taken over. In fact, that's what did happen. After this whole thing was over and the Egyptian or the Israelites left, do you know what did happen? Another nation came in and took over. Because they didn't have any way to fight. They were left completely vulnerable in every way. Some surrounding nations came in and took over and just became the next pharaohs and the next leaders. Some other, they were, a lot of them were like city-states kind of thing. If you think about, remember when they went into the land of Canaan, they were fighting one city after another. They were their own little city-states, their own little city governments. And they took over the nation of Egypt and themselves became the new Egyptian leaders. I guess I'd say it that way, yeah. I don't remember. This is said to be in like the 12th dynasty. Well, you had more dynasties after that. So this is kind of the understanding of what happens here, okay? Next one is darkness, the plague of darkness. Look at 21 to 23 and 27 to 29. Who wants to read those? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. And Pharaoh said unto them, Get thee from me, take heed to thyself, see my face no more, for in the day that thou seest my face thou shalt die. And Moses said, Thou hast spoken well, I will see thy face again no more.
All right. So at this point, he agrees to let them go, but he sets a rule to it. They can go without their flocks. And then what's he do? He's going to change his mind. And they can go, or they can't go, and his heart is hardened. And at this point, we don't have any response of any of the servants of Pharaoh or of the magicians. They're not mentioned. Okay, what God is this? It's the god Ra, which is the sun god. And now all of a sudden the sun's gone for 3 days. So bad is it that it says that the darkness was felt. I don't even know what that had to have been like. Yeah. You can feel the darkness in a cave. It's a creepy feeling. But you imagine, yes sir, or ma'am, sorry. Scary in the dark. Similar, maybe, something like that, right? But what's amazing is, in Goshen, it's like nothing's happening. Because I don't know what it would have been like. Would there have been like a point where you cross and it turns dark? And you cross over and it's light? I don't know. But it said for those 3 days that people just stayed put. Didn't even move. Do you think God was making it very clear that He's more powerful than their gods? Yeah. He's really angry, but he's still foolish. Here's something we do learn of a hardened heart. They don't reason. Hardened hearts go against all the evidence that's sitting right before their face. And everything's happening all around him, but he's so full of his own pride and so hardened in his heart that he can't even submit to this. One of the reasons why is because Pharaoh himself thought himself to be a god. And who is he to bow himself to another god, a nation, another, and not just any god, the slave's god? I mean, that's great humility, right? At least that's what it sounds like. Okay, last one, and we'll talk more about this next week. Death of the firstborn. Death of the firstborn. Look at 11:4-9. 11:4-9. Who wants to do that one? All right, Darla, go ahead.
And Moses said, Thus saith the Lord, about midnight will I go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, and the firstborn of Pharaoh that sitteth on his throne, even unto the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the mill, and all the firstborn of the beasts. And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there was none like it, nor shall be like it any more. But against any of the children of Israel shall not a fraud move his tongue against man or beast, that he may know how that the Lord doth put a difference between Egyptians and Israel. And all these thy servants shall come down unto me, and bow down themselves unto me, saying, Get thee out, and all people will follow thee. And after that I will go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in a great anger. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land.
Okay, so this last one. With a hard heart, he is now forced to release them, right? That's what's going to happen. We'll talk more about it. Because who dies? Not just his servants' firstborns, his own firstborn dies. Magicians, do we see them there? No mention. And I don't know what I could say, but I would almost think this was one final attack, and it was an attack against the one leading the entire nation who thought himself to be the god of that nation, Pharaoh. And he could not prevent this. By the way, the firstborn would have been the next one to take the throne, right? And now he's no longer able to. What an amazing thing God was doing at this point, is making it very clear that they have no power over us anymore. Making it very clear to the Egyptians, making it very clear to the Israelites of who their God was. Why did he harden his heart? Why did he go through that whole process of continually hardening his heart over and over? So that he would be exalted for who he is, and all the world would know it. And by the time they got to the land of Canaan, do you remember what the people in the land of Canaan remembered? How God destroyed the greatest nation in the world. Their God did it. And you know how rumors spread. This would have been a rumor that would have spread everywhere, at least in that whole part of the world. Right? So God was putting himself on display. Did you have a question? Of course.
My question is, how is this embracing him?
It's making, see, God gets glory in two different ways. He gets glory by showing great mercy, but he also gets glory in showing his wrath. And both are happening. Does that make sense? Okay, let's say about the flood, Noah's flood. Does God get glory for that? It was a horrible event that happened, but man, look what it tells about the kind of God we serve. He is a very powerful God, not to be taken lightly. If he could do what he did over the whole world in one swift judgment. There is no other God. Yeah. Yeah, and that was the very beginning statement. Do you remember what Pharaoh said at the very beginning when Moses went in? Who is this God that I should submit to him? Remember that? That was sort of the statement he made. And God said, I'll show you who I am. And that's what he did all the way through, yes.
I just wonder through all these events, on the opposite side, how did the Hebrew children receive all this going on, how different they're treated than Egyptians? What did that do to their faith or view of God?
All you got to do is read what happens afterwards. How did they handle being in the wilderness? Which is one more evidence to tell you that all those miracles and signs and wonders don't have the ability to change hearts. Hearts have to be changed by the will of a person, right? I heard someone say it this week when we were at the men's meeting that said God owns everything except your own will. You have to humble your own heart. You have to choose to humble your heart. I thought that was a good statement made there, is to remember that He gives us the chance to make our hearts right. But at the same time, does He control hearts? Does He work in hearts? Have we not seen that through Pharaoh's example? That he hardens hearts. But it wasn't against Pharaoh's own will that he hardened his heart. Do you understand that as well? Pharaoh was choosing to harden his heart as well. I got one more worksheet that I'm going to ask you to take home and do yourself because we don't have enough time here. But it's called Plaguing Questions, and it's asking about who hardened whose heart. And both are involved. Both Pharaoh hardened his heart. It says 5 different times Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then it says 5 different times Moses hardened Pharaoh's heart. And so both were involved in the process. And then there's some other questions that happen. What about these plagues? And there seems to be what people would say I would say skeptics would say some apparent contradictions in the plagues. This is an opportunity for you to search some of those things out and look at that and show you that there's no contradictions. Okay? And if you have any questions, maybe tonight, if we have some time, we might bring that back and people bring it back. And you have any questions that you want to answer and we can work through them, bring this back tonight and we'll talk about it, okay? So if you'll hand those out at the end of here and then we'll be done. Let me finish off with some final thoughts and then we are done. There are people both in our world, both Christian, at least they call themselves Christian, and non-Christian, that try to explain away miraculous things, especially things like this. They try to attribute the plagues as being some just really bad year of stuff, of natural events. All you got to do is look up the skeptics of what they think about the plagues. And they'll come up and say, oh, well, the blood wasn't really blood. It was some kind of algae that overgrew the river, and they all thought it was blood. And, we all have locust plagues. And we all have fly plagues from time to time. And the hail, they said, oh, there's all sorts of times where there's hail that happens and things of those nature. But God has made it clear here all the way through there's supernatural elements to it. Has He not? When He splits off from one to the other, when He says one group of people get it and the other group doesn't, that's unique. That's miraculous happening. So got a chance for you to ask that. So how do you deal with that when people go and they say things like that? That's just natural occurrences. How'd you deal with that? Yeah. They have an invisible wall they can't go through, right? Yeah. Here's one of the things I think is good to remember. Skeptics always are going to be skeptics. And no amount of evidence will make a skeptic a non-skeptic. No amount of evidence. Because skeptics are there by choice, not by evidence or lack of it. Okay? And I know we've said that multiple times, but that needs to be remembered, is that when you see a skeptic, it's not because they don't have enough light. Remember what Jesus said it this way? This is the condemnation. Light is coming to the world. What's the next part? Men love darkness rather than light. It wasn't that there wasn't light. It's that they loved the darkness more than they loved the light. Okay? And that's what it comes down to. All right? 2, why don't we see miracles like this happening today? Good question. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Anybody else have another thought? Yes. Wouldn't believe Him anyways? Okay, here's a presupposition a lot of people have about the Bible. They think that on every page of the Bible there are miracles happening everywhere. Did you know that's not true? Do you know this is the first time in the history of since God made the world, that would be a miracle I would guess, but since God made the world that there has been miraculous stuff happening? And we're looking at nearly 20 centuries after the creation that have happened. When's the next time miracles happen? Anybody know? Doesn't happen until the days of Elijah and Elisha. Well, I guess you'd say in Joshua's day, which kind of picks up after Moses. But after Joshua's day, it stops. Remember in the book of Judges, they were saying, where are those signs that our fathers talked about? Gone. Not there. It's not till the days of Elijah and Elisha, only 2 prophets, that it happens around them. And then when they're gone, it stops. The next kind of miracle, and it only happens maybe a couple times, are in the time of Daniel, and there's just a couple incidences that happen. Then it stops. 400 years. When's the next set of miracles show up? Days of Jesus and the time of the apostles. And even as you finish out the book of Acts, the miracles start coming to an end. Do they fully come to an end? No. But they're not as prominent as they were in the days of Jesus. Do you see that? And then throughout church history from that point on, there really hasn't been that kind of set of miracles going on. Yes, sir.
I think it's really good. I really appreciate you putting emphasis on not to look so much for miracles. People can be taken too much by that. I did see a deal, I didn't know about this in the War of 1812, that when the British burned the Capitol, they had like 3,000 to 4,000 British soldiers that were really given a piece of land there. This is on the Weather Channel, though, when a tornado hit D.C. and it hit the British troops and they had to scatter. They're terrified.
Yeah.
A tornado came through, so out of nowhere.
Now, that doesn't, now the whole idea, what I was saying, doesn't eliminate that miracles still don't happen. They just don't happen at the same level, right? We're not living in that age anymore. We're not living in that time. And as you said, we have the book that testifies, and we don't need miracles to live by faith. If you had to live by miracles, it's not really living by faith anyways, is it? It's living by sight. Yeah. Yes, sir. The last one recorded in the book of Acts would be Paul on the island of Melita, or what would be Malta. And he heals quite a few people on that island after he'd been shipwrecked. Governor gets healed, and then a lot of the people. That's the last that's recorded in the history time. So it would fit in that time frame, yeah, on the same island. Yep. 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 All right. Well, let's go ahead and we'll close the prayer. We'll come back in about 15 minutes, all right? Thank you, Lord, for being good to us. We do pray that you'll bless our time as we continue in the service here this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.